Greetings, everyone, on the SciFiction awesomeness. My name is Owen Cotter, and you're watching SciFiction on all the digital awesomeness here on the internet. Here is our website, SciFiction.com, right down here. And my name is Owen C. Cotter if you're watching us on the feed. Today we have some special guests, amazing guests. We're going to be talking about the 100th anniversary of Rod Serling, the creator of the Twilight Zone and Night Gallery. Joined on our show are going to be some amazing guests. Jodi and Ann Serling, his daughters, as well as Marc Zicree. He wrote the Twilight Zone Companion. I believe it's up on the next edition. We're going to be talking about his new book, as well as the legacy of Rod Serling. People just joining us, my name is Owen Cotter. You are watching SciFiction. We are simulcasting on Facebook, Twitch, X, and YouTube. So if you want to ask any questions, get them ready. We'll bring them up in the chat. We'd love to talk to the fans and see what their thoughts are and interact with these awesome, amazing guests that we have today. Will be joining us here in about 8 minutes. Be bringing everybody into the broadcast. We just got back from Los Angeles. We're at the Saturn Awards, and I had an absolute blast down there. It was absolutely fun. We're down here in Las Vegas taking care of a few business items before we jolt back home. But yeah, we've been doing pretty well. We had a blast out there. They had all kind of sci-fi goodies and everything you can imagine down there. It was absolutely amazing. But here joining us here, sure, I think people are starting to pour in here. We can get everybody joined in here in a second. Yeah, if you're watching this, my name is Owen C. Cotter on SciFiction.com. I run the site, our teams of awesomeness. We have all kind of writers. If you haven't been to the site, go check it out. It's at SciFiction.com. Be joining here shortly with Ann and Jodi Serling, as well as Marc Zicree. It's going to be an amazing broadcast. I'm really looking forward. We had to reschedule this from yesterday to today due to the minor little scheduling conflict, but it's awesome. We're going to have rocking and rolling now, so can't beat that. Like I said, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Jodi and Ann and Marc, feel free to chime in. I've got the display here for the chat. We'll feature your comments here live on the network. Stay tuned here shortly. Get a little drink here and hydrate up. It's more or less a Dr. Pepper, but it still works, right? It's all good stuff. People joining us, my name is Owen C. Cotter. We're going to bring on some guests here shortly. Just waiting everybody to pour in. Just got back from Saturn Awards. A lot of nominations and a lot of winners, too. We've got a whole bunch of announcements coming from that. We got an article we're putting together, a whole bunch of video clips. So we can go over some of that later on next broadcast. But, yeah. I think we've got a few people pouring in here, it looks like. Feel free to ask comments. Chat in the chat. We'll feature your comments on the digital awesomeness. And, yeah, let's get ready to rock and roll here. Hope everybody's had a beautiful week and having a beautiful week, more importantly. We've got all kind of goodies coming up for me. Tons of content we've still got left to edit, including from the Saturn Awards. And the also, we have backlog content, too, a little bit from the last few events we went to. Tons of stuff from Saturn's. We're going to be uploading a whole bunch of photos and different video clips and reels and everything you can imagine on the digital awesomeness. This is right here. People joining me, my name is Owen C. Cotter. We're simulcasting on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and X. Let's give us a few more minutes here to join in our amazing guest that we're going to talk today with. Got the 100th anniversary of Rod Serling, the creator of Twilight Zone and Night Gallery. Amazing individual. We're going to be talking with his daughters about his legacy and the television series he created, as well as Marc Zicree, a legendary screenwriter and author himself, done a lot of things with a lot of many sci-fi franchises, everything from Star Trek, TNG, Deep Space Nine, Babylon 5, pretty much your entire childhood, He-Man, Smurfs, the real Ghostbusters, Captain Power, and the Souls of the Future. He'll be on with us as well. So joining us here shortly. Hope everybody's having a beautiful week. We just got back from the Saturn Awards, so we're going to bring you all kind of goodies from that. And let me show y'all something real quick. We got the, let me bring this up on the screen here if I can find it. That's the wrong screen. Hold on a second here. Give me just a second. Boot into this. You're going to love this, guys. And ladies and gentlemen. Let's see what we got here. There's that. Let's see. I'll show y'all something cool. We still got tons of photos we're going through, and clips and video clips and all kind of goodies. But this is pretty cool. This post especially. So we got a lot of good interviews and things. I'm going to show you this real quick. This is on our Facebook page. If you haven't checked out our Facebook page, feel free to do that. So we talked with a lot of individuals this week at the Saturn Awards. I think Mark's joining us. Ann's here. How's it going, Mark? We're going to bring you on here shortly. Everybody's joining us here. Before I get this started, I'll show you this right quick, and then we'll join. Got to talk with Bill Shatner this weekend at the Saturns. Jesse from A-Train, from The Boys. RoboCop himself, Peter Weller. Dean Devlin, who's putting on the event with Electric Now. Doug Jones, the man. He's also in Mark's show, Space Command. And you've got the guy from The Walking Dead, the legendary awesomeness there. And the gentleman, this guy here is Cameron. He played the son of Homelander in The Boys. And that gentleman there, you might remember from HGTV. And these are the actors from Supernatural. And this lady's awesome as well. There's just tons of, and this guy's Shane Black. Of course, you watch Predator and Iron Man 3, you might remember that. We're going to get started on the broadcast here. We're about to bring our guest on here in literally 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, and bring on Ann first. Ann, how you doing today? And Mark. How y'all both doing today?
Hi,
Great.
how are you? Hi, Mark.
Awesome.
Hi, Ann.
We got you on 3 screens here, so you're all simulcasting.
Cool.
You having a pretty good day?
Great.
Can't beat that. We got y'all's names right. Let's see, right there. There it is. Or somewhere in here.
Mm-hmm.
All these things are left and right. So is Jodi going to be joining us as well, or?
I think so.
Cool.
So. Yeah, we might have. Elaine, could you tag Inez to make sure Jodi joins us?
Cool.
Yeah, great. Terrific. So, but here we are. So
yeah, we got some questions. We got some fan questions. We got the fans on the chat. We got several questions. We got Lost in Space Collectibles is joining us. They're pouring in now. So we got some good questions. Several people submitted already some really good questions for y'all.
Terrific.
Twilight Zone Companion, is it in its 4th edition now?
Third edition. I updated it recently because people kept telling me stories about the Twilight Zone that I hadn't heard before, and Rod Serling, of course. And so it has 100 more pages. It's got 500 new photos. It's got links to audio and video. Wow. It's sort of Twilight Zone Companion on steroids. So
Jodi's joining us here. It sounds like galactic steroids. Here's Jodi. We're all through now. Here we are, everybody. Yay.
Good.
So I want to first off thank all of y'all for joining me on today's broadcast.
Elaine, it's okay.
Oh, for sure. Jodi and Ann, pleasure to finally meet y'all and talk about your father's legacy of the 100th anniversary of your father's awesomeness. And, of course, I'm a big Twilight Zone fan, and we know Mark's a Twilight Zone fan. Yep. He's got all the goodies. But I want to start with you, Ann, and Jodi. I've got a question. Several fans have asked various versions of this. So this question first applies to both of you, Jodi and Ann. If your dad, Ron, were still with us today in 2025, what do you think he would think about the current television landscape?
Well, I always say this, but my dad would, I think he'd initially be deeply, deeply saddened and then apoplectic.
What about you, Jodi?
I think that he, like my sister said, he'd be really disappointed in the way TV has turned and adding the reality shows and these empty shows that are on that don't, that just have no meaning. I think it would be very frustrated for him.
Yeah.
Were you talking about television or the world in general? Oh,
just television and overall focusing on that amplified to the world in general. That's a good question, actually, that you asked there.
Okay. I was responding more to the world, but I agree with what Jodi said. Reality television would have infuriated him.
Yeah. Well, following up with that question, we got a little bonus question there. It kind of pertains to the actual show Twilight Zone, which is the topic of this discussion. Now, Mark knows a lot about this from his work in episodic television. Every episode of the Twilight Zone strives to deliver an important message to the viewer via the storytelling. What do y'all think about this approach pertaining to modern entertainment, and what could be improved, like a bonus to what we'd already talked about?
And Jodi, would you like to? Oh, you want me to jump in? Sure, happy to.
You jump in.
I think television is the most powerful art form that mankind has ever developed. It combines all of the major arts, and it goes directly into people's homes and their phones and whatever way they access media. And I think, as Rod understood, because remember, Rod was at his height when TV was taking a very severe turn toward emptiness deliberately not wanting to offend anyone, and he saw the great opportunity to inform, to move people, to speak his mind via science fiction and fantasy. And so all of the showrunners he inspired, whether it's David Chase with The Sopranos, or Ron Moore with For All Mankind and Battlestar Galactica, or Vince Gilligan with Breaking Bad, and so forth, they're all children of Serling. And so there's a lot of crap out there. My friend and mentor Theodore Sturgeon, he was a great science fiction writer. He defined Sturgeon's law, which is that 90% of everything is crap. Now, when I wrote a book recently with Guillermo del Toro said that he had to counter that, he had del Toro's law, which is 10% of everything is awesome. And so I think we who write and produce and direct television have a great opportunity to utilize that medium, and particularly now more than any time, as Rod understood in his time, it's vital that we not duck that responsibility, that we seize it and the opportunity of it. And it's funny because, Rod has been an inspiration to all of us. And the other night Space Command was nominated for Best indie science fiction film by the Film Threat, a big independent magazine, and we won. Look, there's the award.
There you go. That's awesome.
Yeah, there you go. So,
awesome.
So it's an honor to win. But Rod really set the tone. He showed what the medium was capable of, that it could be as powerful an art form as literature, as the theater, as art, as any other art form. He was our Leonardo da Vinci.
Yes, for sure. The overall impact of Twilight Zone in the ecosphere still resonates today, permeating the messages still relevant today. You have mentioned on many times before, a few times before I've talked with you, Mark, that when you were doing research for the Twilight Zone Companion, you had come across some recordings that Ron had done.
Yes. Yes.
If they were ever to be turned maybe into like an audio drama or maybe some kind of narrative, what was your thoughts? Yeah.
Well, it was Rod, of course, was unique in that he had this phenomenal verbal style that was his and only his. You recognize it the moment you hear it, and it permeates his writing in every facet. And he dictated, as Anne and Jodi can testify, he dictated all of his scripts, all of his speeches, all of his letters into a recorder. And then his secretary would type it up, and he'd make hand corrections. And I was lucky enough when I was researching the Twilight Zone Companion to find audio and videotapes of Rod teaching classes, both here in Los Angeles and at Ithaca and so forth. But they thought that those dictaphone recordings, those dictation recordings, were lost, and they recently found 1,000 of them. So I've been talking to Anne and Jodi and also their representative Rick Berg about doing a new show that Rod would narrate from that material, and that would also consist of Rod Serling scripts that have never been made, as well as other scripts by other brilliant writers like Matheson and Beaumont and so forth. And those talks are ongoing, and I'm hoping that Anne and Jodi will wave their magic wands and let me do this show. But regardless, any time that new Rod Serling material in the form of outlines that have never been made, scripts that have never been made, or recordings that have never been heard surfaces, it's like finding a new painting by Leonardo da Vinci or a new sculpture by Michelangelo. It's it's a cause for celebration. So yeah.
Well, pertaining to that television, for Jodi and starting with Anne, if there are any topics that were to be made into something like that of those shows, like, is there anything particular that y'all may have know about some of those scripts or recordings, or something that stood out that you would like to see made into a television or an audio drama from that information he has?
It's early in the process.
Or any topics you personally reflected from now to modern times that you'd like to focus on?
I can mention one project that I've wanted to make for decades. Rod was astonishingly determined to get Twilight Zone made. And to that end, he wrote 4 pilot scripts for Twilight Zone before the show got greenlit with Where Is Everybody? And so he wrote Time Element and another hour script called I Shot an Arrow into the Air, which is totally different from the episode of that name on Twilight Zone. And he also wrote an episode called The Happy Place. It's an hour script. And if Rod were with us now, he'd be 100 years old. His birthday was Christmas. And Anne and Jodi and myself, without revealing secrets, are heading toward our perhaps later years, senior years, one might say. And this was a script that Rod wrote, and he wrote it in his early 30s. But it's about a dictatorship of the future, where when you turn 60, you're sent to an ideal retirement community called the Happy Place, where you are exterminated.
Oh, wow.
And I think that is an incredibly powerful script, and I would love to see that get made, because now with the political issues now we're having with our government, the fact that seniors are being kicked to the curb, I think it's more. I mean, he was incredibly prescient, and you know, his writing doesn't age. I mean, it literally is always current for every generation. And Jodi, I don't know if you'd like to comment on that, but you know, there you go.
What kind of thoughts you got on it?
Yeah, you know, because he dealt with the human condition, and you know, as they say, times change, but people don't. We're still dealing with all of the things that my dad was so passionate and vocal about: racism, anti-Semitism, isolation. You know, and that's what I meant when I said he'd be deeply saddened, because the fact that these issues are still so relevant and still so prevalent.
Yes.
I will just say, you know, that the issues that my dad wrote about, obviously they're cyclical, and they never go away, because we still see racism, and we still have fears of nuclear annihilation, and lots of problems that either were not solved back then, and are back again. And I think that my dad's works, you know, continue to pop up in strange places, and they'll remain with us forever. My dad definitely had premonitions of what was to be, and many of these premonitions that he had have come back to fruition. But I can tell you that my dad really never saw the lasting future in his work. Even with his like supernova imagination, he could not see the pervasive and lasting influence that that his work had. And I do believe that the Twilight Zone has, you know, literally and figuratively become so thoroughly ingrained in our collective consciousness. And I really wish that he was here to see what an impact he continues to have on our society.
Yeah,
Well, Mark,
yeah. Well, you know, oh yeah, go ahead. What I was going to say is, I agree with both of you, Anne and Jodi. And one thing I was thinking of right now, we need an opposition. We need a vocal opposition. But a lot of the politicians are mushmouth. They can't stir you with their words. They can't stir you. They can't, you know, bring it home, which we need. We need those people who can take a subject of oppression, of the individual being erased, all those things. And Rod had that great gift of being able not just to speak an opinion, but to tell a human story where it wasn't just your head being moved, it was your heart being moved. And that's the most important of all. TV at its best, as is with movies, TV is an empathy machine. And that's what we need to do now. We need to awake people's empathy so that people will understand how terrible having your government taken away from you is. And so there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, he once said that it was a writer's job to menace the public's conscience.
Yes.
That's powerful.
So,
one of his famous little quotes.
The Twilight Zone companion, Mark. Let's talk about that for a second.
Sure.
You originally, can you kind of go over into the journey into creating the first version, and what kind of new things we kind of got on the pipeline that we could look forward to in the up and coming editions?
You mean the new edition of the Twilight Zone companion? What's different about it, or
that kind of your journey and the kind of getting, and what was the process of creating all that? A little Cliff Notes version of that.
Yeah, I mean, I got out of college with an art degree from UCLA and one short story sale under my belt, and I knew I wanted to be a writer, producer in TV, and Twilight Zone and Outer Limits and Star Trek, the original versions of those shows, made me realize the incredible power and opportunity of the medium, and I wanted to be part of that. And but there were no classes in that. There was no way to learn it. And so I thought, this is 2 years after Rod's death. He died in 1975, and this was 1977. I was newly married. I was 21 years old, and I thought, well, maybe if I write a book about the greatest TV show ever made, I can learn how to make great television. And I was also a huge fan of the Twilight Zone. I had enormous curiosity about this. And I'd met George Clayton Johnson, one of the Twilight Zone writers. He did Kick the Can and Nothing in the Dark and Game of Pool. I met him at a science fiction convention when I was 16, and he referred to himself as the world's oldest hippie, which he was, and a very dear man. And he was very encouraging. And he connected me up with a few people who'd worked on Twilight Zone, and I'd already heard that Jodi and Anne's mom, Carol, had turned down major journalists who wanted to write about Twilight Zone. So I knew that little 21, 22-year-old me with no credibility wasn't going to be able to sway, Rod Serling's widow. And so I spent 3 months interviewing people who had worked on the show until I felt like I really knew the subject. And I really felt that I could bring this book into the world. And so I met with Carol at that point, and I made my spiel, and I saw that future where I could create this amazing, amazing book. I really had a vision for what I wanted it to be. And she said, well, let me talk to a few people and get back to you. And clearly she talked to some of the people I'd interviewed, like Buck Houghton and George Clayton Johnson and Richard Matheson. And she came back and said, yeah, you've got full access to everything. And it was, there's certain people who are angels in your life. And certainly Carol was that to me. Certainly Jodi and Anne have been that to me. I mean, these incredible people who didn't have to be kind to me, who didn't have to open up their lives and their hearts and their experiences to me. And they did. And I will always be grateful to you, both of you, because that got my career going. I mean, I was writing that book in my early 20s. By the time I was 22, 23 years old, I was writing for television. And here I am. This year is my 50th year as a professional writer. And I've had this amazing career writing I'm writing for all these TV shows. I have my own studio now. I mean, it's, if not for your kindness, I'd probably be, asking for quarters on a street corner, so, there's no telling what would have happened to me. So other than the fact I have the love of a good woman. So Elaine is the other part of that triumvirate. So,
it's always good. Well, science fiction is, of course, we just got back from the Saturn Awards. It's still very popular, as we know, right, Mark?
Yes,
the ecosphere of sci-fi permeates, not just delivers messages, but also permeates into a form of a medium that can be told to make powerful messages and tell great storytelling. You yourself know about that. You wrote a lot of scripts from many, many television series, and you're doing a new show, Space Command, as well, which kind of resonates and harkens back to the old days of the Twilight Zone and Star Trek. If you were to see anything in the future, not just with entertainment, but in the real world, like an applicable, maybe a scenario or a technology that could benefit people's lives, what would that be for you, starting with you, Anne, and then Jodi, and then Mark? Like one singular topic or something. Oh, boy. Nice.
Yeah, no, I don't want to interrupt. Go ahead, please, Anne. Do you want to kick it off?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, repeat it.
Yeah.
I was just saying, like, if you could have one thing that would resonate, not just in science fiction, but in the real world, that could be kind of futuristic or something that would help bring about a better tomorrow. Could be a scenario or a technology or something. What would that be? One singular item.
I'm not sure I can say what I'm thinking. It's about our president.
Yes.
It's a tough one.
You want to?
It is.
Yeah. Well,
Mark,
I would suggest an empathy machine, just something that you would put you could put on people where they could actually feel the suffering of others and be moved to do something about it. But beyond, it's very funny because in terms of technology, my first short story sale was a story called Leader of the Club. It was inspired by the fact that when Nixon gave a talk at Disney World, and I realized that they could swap out the Disney robot of Nixon and Disney would be running the country. And now, of course, that story is even more timely because these rich plutocrats, these oligarchs, are running our government now. And so, so whether it's the real Trump or a robot of Trump, someone else is pulling the strings. And but I think the main thing about technology is I created a word not long ago, dysutopia, because our world is always a mix of dystopia and utopia. It's never one, the one or the other like they have in science fiction. It's always a mixture of the worst and the best. And so technology is always being used for good and for bad. But the one thing I wanted to point out, you mentioned the Saturn Award, and this is the one I received, and this is for I produced the Twilight Zone Blu-ray set, and in 2010 I won this for producing the Twilight Zone Blu-ray set because people love the Twilight Zone. They understand it has meaning. Even when they've seen an episode a million times, they still love it, and because it makes them feel and it makes them think, and they just understand that Rod was this amazing presence, and the Twilight Zone is as popular now as it ever was, and I agree with Anne and Jodi that the one regret, of course, is that Rod didn't live to see how popular the show would be, how loved his work would be, and how loved he would be. And that's the one thing I'm sure that, if we could invent a machine that would bring Rod back, if only for a day, to see how much he's loved and how much he accomplished. When Rod did Twilight Zone, TV was barely a decade old, and so really people didn't know if it was going to last, what it was going to become. They saw its enormous potential, and as Rod lived through the 60s into the mid 70s, TV was sort of at a low point. I mean, there's a lot of real crap shows being made, some of which I love, Gilligan's Island or McHale's Navy or whatever, I Dream of Jeannie, but those aren't going to turn someone's life around the way Twilight Zone did. And so I can understand why Rod didn't know the impact he would have, because really no one knew at that point in 75, 50 years on, was anyone going to be watching any of these shows? And remarkably, the shows they're watching are science fiction. Star Trek is still current. Twilight Zone is still current. Whereas, if you're, there might be some people watching, Have Gun Will Travel or Gunsmoke, but they're certainly not going to be changing the world, so.
Is there a particular favorite episode that you and you all have, that each one of y'all could tell, like your particular favorite, or one or your ones that stood out that y'all like?
Well,
Anne, Jodi,
mine would be probably one that was the most personal for me was an episode called In Praise of Pip with Jack Klugman and Bill Mumy. And in this episode, and I didn't watch many of them until after my father had died, and more to see him than the actual story. But in this particular one, I realized that my dad used a routine that he and I used to do. Who's your best buddy? You are. And it was such a poignant moment to watch this and literally find my dad again in the Twilight Zone. I also love ones that are with the theme of going back in time. Walking distance, stuff at Willow.
Yeah.
What about you,
Jodi? Do you have a favorite?
Yeah, my favorite is Walking Distance.
Yeah.
For sure. There's just so many pieces of my dad in that particular story. It's so heartwarming. Every time at the end, I get tears in my eyes because it was so much him wanting to go back, grab a hold of something that he lost, when he went over to the Philippines, and then not being able to see his dad again. And this story, I think it was one of my mom's favorite as well, was just, it's just so personal, so, just so heartwarming and sad. And it just grabbed the hold of me every time that I watch it, because it's my dad, so much of my dad in it, and what he wanted and missed.
What about you, Mark?
Yeah. Well, Anne, were you going to say something? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on.
Walking Distance, similar to the Night Gallery, they're tearing down to Miley's Bar, which is another beautiful, beautiful story.
Yeah, it's a great piece of work. In terms of Walking Distance, I love that episode as well. And I must say that decades later, when I got to go to Binghamton, Rod's hometown from when he was a kid, and see, the merry-go-round, and see the bandstand, and see the family home, which is still there, it was like, wow, I saw that in Walking Distance, those things, Rod summoning them up. And so it is very autobiographical. I love Kick the Can as well, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, Eye of the Beholder. I mean, you really can't go wrong with Twilight Zone. I mean, Rod wrote 92 out of the 156 episodes, and of course hosted all of them. And it's an astonishing output. And then he was wise enough to hire brilliant writers like Richard Matheson and Charles Beaumont and George Clayton Johnson and even Earl Hamner, who went on to create the Waltons, to write stories that were different from what Rod would write, but within that universe. So Kick the Can is George Clayton Johnson's great script, and Nightmare 20,000 Feet is probably Matheson's greatest. One can make an argument about that, but it's these are incredible pieces of work.
Yeah,
I actually used the sound score of the remake of Kick the Can at our wedding.
Nice.
Wow.
Very cool.
It's great. Yeah, Bernard Herrmann, just wonderful writing,
No,
wonderful score.
Was that Bernard Herrmann in the remake?
In the new one, no, that would be Jerry Goldsmith. You mean feature? You mean that would be that's Jerry Goldsmith. But again, he composed for the original Twilight Zone as well, as did Bernard Herrmann, who was of course the great composer of Psycho and North by Northwest and so forth. So yeah, amazing talents. Yeah, your dad brought out the best in people.
The cinematography of George Clemens also gave the show a distinctive look as well. And I will mention that, having it in black and white just gave every episode this charismatic and atmospheric effect for sure. That anything in color could not match for sure.
No, and it's funny, because the common wisdom, quote unquote, is that young people won't watch anything that's in black and white, and yet people, young people love the Twilight Zone. They love the look of it, and I've never heard anybody advocate for colorizing Twilight Zone because it's so perfect in black and white. It would be a very different animal and not nearly as engaging, visually. So I think this speaks to when you do something brilliantly, it'll have its appeal regardless, so it's not about whether people like color or black and white. It's what is being conveyed, what story is being told within that medium, so yeah, George Clemens was amazing. And it's funny, when I interviewed him back in 1977, he was of course one of the great cinematographers of all time, but I said to him, are you any relationship to Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain? And he remembered as a kid meeting him and being given the complete works of Mark Twain signed to him by Mark Twain. So that was pretty cool. I love the way when you interview people, it reaches back to the past and back and back and back. So I was talking to a guy who had talked to Mark Twain, pretty amazing. So yeah.
Samuel Clemens is Mark Twain's original name. Yeah, that's wow.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. A dear friend of mine who actually wrote Everything I Need to Know I Learned in the Twilight Zone is writing a book on Mark Twain.
Yeah, you've written a book as well, Anne, I believe, about your father. Can you talk a little bit about that?
About my book?
Yeah, you have a book.
Yeah. Right. As I knew him, my dad, Rod Serling. I'd originally written a book called In His Absence, and it was because I find writing cathartic, like my dad and many writers do. I was demolished when my dad died, and it took me years to navigate through that. I'm not sure I've actually successfully done that. Difficult journey for anybody, but it was initially to navigate through my grief, and I also wanted to know more about my dad. And the third reason was I wanted to dispel any rumors that he was this dark and tortured soul, because he wasn't. He was silly and funny and would watch the Flintstones, and so it was that's why I wrote the book. And I've heard from so many people who tell me that they thought of my dad as their father, and people that have become writers because of it. And so many people actually that have told me they had tumultuous childhoods and thought of my dad as their father. That was really shocking to hear, as it would have been for him.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful book that Anne's written. I think of it as the Twilight Zone companion's companion, and because the two books together really give you the entire enchilada. And also, by the way, I interviewed Jodi extensively in the new updated Twilight Zone book. So it's the triumvirate of the three of us saying this is this is what this amazing man did. This is who he was. And because, you know, and when you talk about the grief that you felt, and it's, you know, a big man leaves a big hole. You know, that's the thing. It's like, you know, and but her book is so wonderful and so evocative. And, you know, you talk about walking distance as summing up the past. You know, Anne's book, she definitely shows herself as being Rod Serling's daughter with the writing in that book. It's a gorgeous memoir. I highly recommend it. She also read the audiobook, the unabridged audiobook, which you can find on Audible, and you can find the hardcover or the soft cover, you know, the book on Amazon as well. But whether you want to read it or listen to it, it's just a wonderful piece of work.
Thank you, Mark.
I'll have to check that out. I've not gotten to read that. I read a little bit of your book, Twilight Zone Companion, which is absolutely amazing. It's a third edition.
Yeah.
You think you'll do a fourth edition?
I'll do the fourth edition when you can basically have a brain implant that tells you all about Twilight Zone, and you'll have the entire series downloaded into your head. The one thing I probably will, yeah. Well, when I produced the Blu-ray set, which I was very proud of, I did 52 episode commentaries. That leaves 104 that I haven't done yet. So eventually I'll probably get around to that because I have so much of that in my head. I'm like this walking Twilight Zone encyclopedia. So I'll do that eventually when I have time. But I think I really wanted to share with the readers everything I could about Twilight Zone that was so spectacular, because my big question in writing that book was, what made this so brilliant? Who were these people who made this? How can you grow up and become someone who's capable of coming up with these amazing stories? And I answered that question as much as anyone can by digging deep into Rod's life and Matheson's and George Clayton Johnson and Beaumont, and it was fascinating. It was absolutely fascinating. So and the fun part is, and something I'm very proud of, is my goal in writing the book was to learn how to do that trick, to basically create meaningful television. And I went on, as you said, to do so, and I'm still doing it with Space Command. And you mentioned Bill Mumy, and Bill Mumy's in Space Command, and Veronica Cartwright, who also starred in Twilight Zone and in The Birds and in Alien. She's going to be in the new series I'm creating with Rockne O'Bannon, who created Farscape, and you know, Bill Mumy's in. Yeah. Well, we're creating a new show now called Sweet Haven, and we're about to start shooting it next month, and so pretty exciting. But you know, I wanted to learn how to do that. I wanted to make great TV, and I whether or not it's great, I can't speak to in terms of my output. I hope so, but Rod did that. I'm as much a child of Rod in that creative way as all these other showrunners, and you know, I'm really grateful. So I'm glad that the Twilight Zone was my launching point, not my high point. I'm very, you know, it's like if I was, you know, 50 years in and it was like the only thing I'd ever done was the Twilight Zone Companion, and it's like, oh no, and I, you know, yeah, I was quite a whippersnapper when I was 21 working on this book. It's like, oh man, Jesus, you know, going into bars and saying, you know, are you a fan of the Twilight Zone? Getting free drinks, you know, that would not be a satisfying life for me. So, but I still love Twilight Zone when I see it on the TV, or yeah, I mean, I still watch these episodes and I'm every bit as enthralled by them now. I don't get sick of them. They're jewels. They're jewels.
They are. And y'all are all jewels for joining me today on the show. We have a little bit of time left. I wanted to first thank you, Mark, and Jodi, and Anne especially, for joining me on this broadcast to talk about your father and his legacy at the 100th anniversary.
Thank you, Owen.
No problem.
Yes,
no
thank
problem.
you for having.
No problem.
Really
And I hope you'll have a beautiful day. And the Twilight Zone and all of the work continues to permeate through the ecosphere of not just science fiction, but the world in general. I want to thank y'all so much. Y'all have a beautiful day, okay?
You too.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Peace.
Take care.
Bye.
See you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.